and then the clamor for the death penalty and the harsher punishments is because we hate ourselves that we live in a society where these kind of things happen so common that we are unable to do anything. We are unable to protect people, children, women, transgenders against this kind of rampant sexual violence. It is, I think, these harsh reactions are about our difficulty in coming to terms with the reality of our society.
I've been of the opinion that death penalty is justified for those convicted of heinous crimes. But in doing so, am I completely isolating the perpetrator and their actions to this one crime? Does the onus of the death penalty fall majorly on those marginalized in our society? My guest this episode is Dr. Anup Surendranath. He's the executive director of Project 39A and an assistant professor of law at National Law University in Delhi. Project 39A's Death Penalty India report is the first empirical research done on capital punishment, the way it's administered in our country, and about those who live on death row. The center also offers pro bono legal aid for these convicts. So, should death penalty be abolished? Does it really deter crimes? And why is it we don't look into the mental health of those on death row? Before we listen to this conversation, please remember to follow Maharani Talks on your favorite podcast platform. And I'm your host, Mahati Rangarajan. Hi, Dr. Anup. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. Thanks for having me.
I happened to go through the interesting report, the death penalty report that you've done, which you have headed. It was eye-opening in many ways. And I've actually read that what made you think about doing the report was the Afzal Guru hanging back in 2013. Can you talk about it? What made you think, okay, we need such a research on this?
No, yeah, I mean, I think I very clearly remember where I was when I heard the news that Afzal had been executed. And I think what struck me immediately was that it was almost like a secret execution, right? Nobody knew it was going to happen. And further, how little we knew about the harshest punishment that our legal system has. Even knowing how many people are on death row, or how many people India has executed since independence, or under what conditions are death row prisoners kept in our prisons, are all very basic questions we should have answers to, but we don't, right? And it just showed me the callousness with which we treat such a harsh punishment. And I felt that some very basic questions need to be researched, and that's all that report is really. It asks some very, very basic fundamental questions that we should have known long, long before, right? And it's not to say those problems are solved now.
Yeah.
Even today, if you ask me how many prisoners there are on death row, I mean, we have a fair idea. But am I dead sure about it? No. And we still don't know how many people India has executed since independence.
And how long did this report take you?
Yeah, I mean, start to finish, it took us about 3 years. Yeah.
Okay. And you said about how certain things that you found while doing the research was not surprising in the sense that who often gets the death penalty.
Yeah.
But was there anything about during your research, any findings that really caught you by surprise?
I think what really was, I mean, the most counterintuitive part to it was the number of death row prisoners who, despite being extremely poor, would not use legal aid lawyers in the trial court, right? One would assume that if you're poor and you didn't have money, you would go to the legal aid lawyer that the state is providing, and they didn't. And there was almost like a fear of the legal aid system that the lawyer would collude with the other side or will not do a good job for you. And therefore, what prisoners and families were doing was that they would drive themselves into further debt to, even if it were to get a terrible private lawyer, they would prefer that rather than. And I think the other counterintuitive point was, I don't think I expected going in the number of people who spoke to me about that not wanting to live, right? I would have expected, I think at that point, I expected that going in, everybody would say how they wanted to live and be saved. But a lot of prisoners felt that they were continuing to be a burden on their families, right? And how they were kept so far away from their families. The families had to give up wages, give up daily wages, and travel long distances to come and meet them in these central prisons. And just the hardship of that, even when they come, then they would feel that they can't come empty-handed, that they have to bring some fruits or snacks, and that was a further expenditure and already a strain on already given the economic hardship. So they felt that what is the purpose of living like this, being a burden on your family? And this is apart from all the social stigma that families suffer. And so the prisoners felt that if you kill us, maybe our families would feel terrible for 6 months or a year, but ultimately they will move on, and at least then they won't feel this burden. So yeah, that was quite counterintuitive, and I didn't expect it to hear it with that kind of frequency and intensity.
If say they are correctly convicted of their crime, did you ever sense a certain amount of remorse in them?
Yeah, and then I think there's no one narrative, right? Is I think what I also learned from these things. Were there people who were remorseful? Of course, there were people who were remorseful for what had happened, and that they wish that it hadn't happened in the manner that it had happened. Equally, there were people who felt that they were wrongfully convicted, right, and that they have been framed, right. So it's no one narrative, right, and some people choose not to talk about the crime at all. So in that sense, remorse is a complicated issue, right? So even if they have been legally found guilty, many of them would protest their innocence, right?
Yeah.
Just as an equal number of people would say, yes, a terrible thing happened, and I wish I could undo that day or that moment, right? Yeah, those are very complicated conversations. Right? Yeah.
You said that how they have a resistance to take up the legal aid that comes for them.
Yeah.
I mean, are they even aware? And if they are, why do they have that hesitance to, reach out?
Yeah. So they are aware, right? They are aware. And it is the narrative that that if you take a legal aid lawyer, that if you take what the government is providing you, the narrative generally in prison is that it's not a good, they don't get good legal representation, that they ask for money anyway, and that they collude with the other side. Right. Or then there's corruption. So there's almost like a fear of the legal aid system, right? That you are putting yourself in a worse situation by going to a legal aid lawyer. So it's not like just by going to a private lawyer, they get better legal representation, but they seem to believe that even if, to get the best private lawyer in a district court is way beyond the means of the kind of people who are on death row. So they might pay a very little amount of money to a private lawyer. The kind of interest that a lawyer takes is more or less proportionate to how much you're paying him or her, right? And I'm not saying that this is absolutely the case. I must say that there were some notable exceptions of lawyers who went way beyond their call of duty to represent some of these people, and even they might have lost. But largely, there is a widespread lack of confidence in the legal aid system amongst the people for whom it is meant. It is not meant for people like you and me, right? It is meant for the poorest and the most vulnerable. And there seems to be a great crisis of confidence in the legal aid system.
And what is really sad is the report also highlights that many of them are unaware of any legal proceedings that's going on.
I often tell my students and my students who worked on this also that, if you were to look at, let's say, the 2G trial, right? That the 2G criminal trial that went on in the allocation of spectrum, which was a criminal trial in Delhi. The way the lawyers would treat their clients there, right? And how informed they would keep them, the kind of consultation they would provide to their clients,
Yeah.
right? You imagine that on the one end of the spectrum, right? Big corporate clients, big corporate officials in a criminal trial, and the kind of representation they got, and the kind of realities that we have documented in the Death Penalty India report, and the kind of representation they get. The gulf is huge, right? And I really think it should be unacceptable for those of us who believe in any modicum of fairness, that this is how trials get done in our system, and not just trials. This is how people then get sentenced to death. And this is not even about, oh, do you believe in the death penalty or not? Even if you believe in the death penalty, the way our system functions is no way to do it, right? Right? And where the poor are, as a matter of routine, treated way, way worse than people like you and me, or big corporate officials. Yeah.
So, is there a certain amount of organizational discrimination in the judiciary?
In the legal system, I would say. It's in the legal system, right? It's in our police stations, in our prisons, in our legal aid system, in the courtroom, amongst the legal aid. The legal system has many components, right? And that kind of exactly what you called it, sort of that structural discrimination. Right? It's not anybody saying that, oh, you are poor, so I will discriminate against you. That is very direct discrimination, right? But what you referred to as organizational or systemic discrimination is when the system does not account for the vulnerabilities of the people it is meant to serve, right? That you need to do more, that way more than what we're doing, to account for that lack of capacity and vulnerability among the people you're meant to serve. Yeah.
Yes, the report highlights that those who are mostly on death row penalty are from the lower socio-economic status.
Yeah.
How does caste play out? Do you find that also as a huge factor?
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to our report does not go into questions of how do you establish if there is direct caste discrimination.
Yeah.
But the composition of death row prisoners would show you, and different states have different stories, right? Again, the all India picture is different from the different states, and the report lays that out. But what I found very striking was, as you go higher and higher in the pyramid of the death sentence prisoners, that is from the trial court to the high court to the Supreme Court to the mercy petition stage, you will see that the composition of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes increases, right? And in that sense, they are the ones who are staying in the system longer and longer and longer, right? While and that is very worrying. That if you think of it as a pyramid, from the district court up to the mercy petition stage, the concentration of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes only intensifies as you go higher.
Okay.
That the claim here is not a direct discrimination claim, right? And I don't want to get into the difference between a direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, and I think what you called it as systemic discrimination, right? That a whole host of factors operate in such a manner, right? That it is the most vulnerable that are left behind because they have the least access, right? Not just economic access. It could be even, community access to lawyers, right? Who are those networks? Who has access to networks of lawyers, of people to tell them what to do, to advise them? And then the point is, certain groups have more privileged access to networks, right? Again, it's networks is not just a function of money, right?
Yeah.
There is also that, but it is also of your own community,
who you might know.
Exactly. Right? How does it exactly play out in each of those cases is a matter for further study and research. But the stacking up of the numbers shows you very troubling structural reality. Yeah. Systemic reality. Yeah.
Right. I want to know what has been your own personal experience while doing this project. You've spoken to so many of them.
Yeah.
So, how has it been like for you?
It was my first, really intense field-based research, and obviously, it's not that prisons were a familiar place for me. I had to travel to prisons all across the country. Very different experience. I think just getting through those huge iron gates itself is a very intimidating and depressing experience, which only intensifies as you see the conditions of our prisons, right? And I really wish more of us would be that we could be shown those realities, right? Prisons are very dark, opaque spaces where there is very little outside sight going in there, right? If you look at those conditions, right, even the most punitive of us would feel that we cannot treat our fellow human beings in such an inhumane manner, right? And this is not to do with, I'm not even starting about death penalty or do they deserve it. Nobody, no human being deserves to be subject to the kind of conditions that our prisons are, right? And there's only so much me explaining it in words can convey, right? And I think we really need to find ways to show our people how our prisons are, right?
Right.
And the conditions there. And I think that would really impact a lot of the conversation. So in that sense, for me, going in there itself was one assumes going into this work that one can handle it, that reading enough of it prepares you for these things. So it's not like I didn't know any of this before going in. A lot has been written about these things. And the point I'm trying to make is it's one thing to read and understand and say, okay, I know it's going to be pretty bad, but it still hits you massively when you go in there and see those realities.
Yeah.
Right. And that was one part of it. And I think the second part of which I certainly wasn't ready for was death row prisoners talking about the kind of torture they were subjected to by the cops during investigation or even in prison once they came in. That when they would show me signs of torture, a complete stranger, right? And how they would just, I don't know, so many of them would just break down talking about what was done to them. And some of them would show me signs of that torture. Some of them would be too ashamed to talk of what was done to them, right? Especially if I had female note takers with me, right? Or female student researchers with me. That just because the kind of torture that we are talking about, it's not easy to talk about it. And for many of them, talking about it in front of women was even more of a shameful experience. So obviously, you don't push in those circumstances and you let them be, right?
Yeah.
All of it really shook me, I think, in a manner that I don't think I ever contemplated when I designed this study. And I guess that is why I just felt, and all of us involved in this project felt that we can't just stop with this as one research project, that we need to, after having seen and asked people to talk about the most troubling aspects of their lives, that we have to continue to try and assist them. And therefore, the work has continued after that. It has taken on a very different shape and form, but yeah, we have continued our engagement. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, you recently come out with Deathworthy, right, to throw light on the mental illnesses of these prisoners.
Yeah.
Is any progress been made in that sense? Taking into account what these prisoners have gone through, or are they going through?
That's a difficult question. I think from our end, what we have done is, of course, try and represent as many prisoners as possible in their cases in the Supreme Court. Right, that is one thing we've done. But from a mental illness part of it, I think it is an issue that hasn't received the kind of attention, right? And I think our idea was to study how many death row prisoners have mental illnesses, intellectual disability, And I think a very interesting part of the report is mapping the adverse childhood experiences, right? Of people and say, and I think the report has very interesting findings on those things. To say that who these people are, right? Who we condemn, who we hate, who we demonize. Like each of us are a product of our circumstances, right? There are many things that happen to us that has led you to where you are, Monkey, and where I am, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, of course, it's not to say that everything happens automatically. There are individual things that we do, but we are also a product. We are also a product of our circumstances, right? And nobody can claim that I'm here just because of my effort, right? Or of the choices, purely the individual choices you made, right? You were put in a certain set of circumstances. There, you made some choices, right? And I think the challenge before all of us is to find the humanity in each of us to say that even the people who have committed what we consider the worst of crimes also need to be looked at like that, right? And you might say, no, I don't want to look at, I don't care about that, right? Yeah, but that's the challenge for us. That's a challenge for each of our humanity, right?
Yeah.
Can we find it in ourselves to say, can I truly understand what got this person to do such a thing? And again, I want to be very careful. I'm not making a case that we all automatically act as a product of our circumstances, but it is a mix of those circumstances, and how we judge our situations and how we react to our situations is so influenced by so many circumstances in our lives, right?
Yeah, you have mentioned that, how we as a society have a bigger role to play when such crimes happen.
Yeah.
And we have failed not just the victim, but the perpetrator as well.
Correct. Yeah.
There are some who might argue that, to say that the whole society has to take part in the reformative process might be a very utopian idea, and it can work only in theory. What do you think can be done in the interim to address, if not death penalty, then what can be done to deter such crimes?
Right. So it really would depend on what crimes you're talking about, right?
Let's say heinous crimes.
Right. Okay. I'm saying let's talk about child sexual violence, right? Right. Let's say in the hierarchy of heinousness that is right up there, right? So let me not shy away from the most difficult case, right, of child sexual violence, right? And now the law has been amended in the last couple of years. POCSO has been amended to introduce the death penalty for child rape, even when there is no murder, right? That is the amendment. Earlier, there had to be murder to also along to get the death penalty. Now they have said even only for child rape, even if there is no murder, you can be given the death sentence, right?
Yeah.
Now, on our YouTube channel, there is this 2.5 minute video of looking at statistics and perspectives. We work with child rights groups to say, will the death penalty work? What does it mean to introduce a death penalty for child sexual violence, right? I mean, you know very well that the biggest problem for child sexual violence in India is that it is massively underreported, right?
Yeah.
People just don't go to the cops about it, right? They don't, or anywhere, or even seek social assistance or any kind of assistance. People just brush it under the carpet, right? So underreporting is a reality of child sexual violence, right? And has always been so.
Right.
Equally, another reality is that over 90%, nearly 95% of perpetrators are known to the victim.
True.
Right? Are known to the survivor, right? That is true of adult rape as it is true of child, right? It is the people who are most proximate to the child that commit the offense, right? Be it a parent or a close relative or neighbor or friends, right? The offenders are known, right? Now, I urge all the listeners tuning into this to say, now on the one hand, you're already saying underreporting is a problem, right? That is not reported. Second, you have the fact that the perpetrators are known people. Now, what do you think will happen if you introduce the death penalty into this, right? You are asking a child and let's say whoever the adult is who is supporting the child to say, let me give you the option here that if you go to the cops, it's possible that this person is going to get the death sentence, right? Which is further going to intensify the problem of underreporting, right?
Okay.
Because you're basically saying, now I am telling you that to report it could mean that your grandfather or your uncle or your father, right, might get the death penalty, right? Now, the point I'm trying to make is, while we might all be shocked and aghast at sexual violence against children, we need to be careful that what does it mean to protect the child, right? Right? And this is, and don't take my word for it, right? And I'm the wrong person to say this, right? And that is why we didn't do it. We work with groups that work with victims of child sexual abuse, right? To say that harsher and harsher punishments in that context is going to drive underreporting even further. People are going to brush it under the carpet even more because you are raising the stakes for them, right?
Yeah.
Right? And we really need to think, what does justice mean in these contexts, right? When a mother is faced with a situation where her husband is abusing their child, right? What does justice mean, right? You and I might say, oh, hang the guy, right? But for those two people, for the child and the mother in that situation, justice might just mean that, can you just take us away from this situation and put us in safety where my subsistence is not in question, right? Where very often what becomes is people are forced to stay on in those abusive contexts because their survival is based on the income of that person who is the abuser.
Yeah.
Right? So justice might mean very different things. Justice is not just about harsher and harsher punishments. I mean, the point I make with this child sexual abuse example is that we need to look at a certain social problem in all its complexity. There are no easy answers.
Yeah.
And we really need to be careful not to worsen the situation. That we might feel a certain kind of rage and a punitive instinct when we hear about this, and that's absolutely fine. I don't think there's anything illegitimate about you and I feeling that that kind of punitive or retributive urge instinctively, and that's fine, right? But it's very different responsibility for the state when bringing in these amendments, when changing the law. It has to look at things in its complete social complexity, right? And I think that doing things like introducing the death penalty is a very knee-jerk reaction, right? It misunderstands the problem, it misunderstands the consequences, right? So yeah, that's what I would say. And yeah, and while being on that point, I'm often asked when I speak in various places, um, would you take the same position if something like this happened to you or someone in your family, or right? It's all very well to stand here and pontificate all of this. Yeah, of course. People who ask such questions are in no position to know what might or might not be the realities in my life. But anyway, that apart,
Right.
right? Right. But that apart, I tell them that, yeah, I might be, if something terrible like this were to, any of these kind of heinous offenses that you're talking about were to happen to my loved ones, friends or family or whoever, I am not saying I am some great evolved soul that would feel that, oh, no, that person should be forgiven or whatever. I might just as much feel a sense of hate, anger, sadness, need for retribution, I might feel that. I mean, right? I might feel that, everybody might feel that. And there is nothing illegitimate about that. And I'm not saying that you should feel any different, right? But my point is, what I feel or what I might need or you might feel that you want or what you deserve is very different from what the state can do, right?
The state can't act on emotions.
Correct. And it can't just step into my shoes and say, I will take over your anger and your retribution. The state is responsible towards everything. Yeah.
In terms of this child sexual abuse crimes that come out, many that I've read, the most heinous ones, where they've harmed the child and then resulted in death.
Yeah.
How the courts go about with the rarest of rare, how does it follow it? And is it done very arbitrarily? But in such cases, how does the court approach such a case?
The law requires, right, that when the prosecution asks for the death penalty, right, there is a framework laid out in a judgment from 1980, known as Bachan Singh versus State of Punjab, which is the origin of this phrase, rarest of the rare, right? And very often people think, there is a misconception amongst the general public, and which is perpetuated by the media, that rarest of the rare means, is it a rarest of rare crime?
Yeah.
Right? Is the crime rare? Right? And therefore, so that is not what the law requires, right? Yes, that is one consideration. The brutality of the crime and the heinousness of the crime are certainly what are known as aggravating factors. But the law also requires for every judge who is considering whether to give the death penalty or not to also consider mitigating factors, right? About both the person accused and his conduct, or his or her conduct. The law has to consider both aggravating factors and mitigating factors. And in mitigating factors, it is the mandate of the law that you have to look at the history of the person, their conduct, their conduct in prison. And the law says that you can give the death sentence only when the alternate option is unquestionably foreclosed, right? What is the alternate option? That is of life imprisonment, right? Only in such circumstances, right, where life imprisonment is unquestionably foreclosed, can you give the death sentence, right? Because in our law, within the criminal procedure code, the default punishment for murder is life imprisonment, right? And judges need to give special reasons if they want to impose death, right?
Okay.
So the law has indicated a preference for life imprisonment generally. And if you want to impose the death sentence, you need to give special reasons, right? And you have to look at both. You can't just say, and this is a mistake a lot of judges also make. They just predominantly look at the heinousness of the crime or the brutality of the crime and then decide whether to give the death sentence or not. But that is not the law. That, right? While in a popular perception, we might think of rarest of rare as, is the crime rare? Is the crime brutal enough? Right?
Yeah. How gruesome it is.
Yeah, but that's not the law. That is one consideration in the law, but not the only consideration.
Okay. When you're doing the report, right? Have you spoken to the families of victims? And if you have, and in such cases, when correctly convicted, did death penalty, do you think it brought about some amount of peace to them?
I haven't. And it almost feels, given the work that we do, it almost feels disingenuous for me to, I don't know. It's something that we've been asked often. But Marty, it's a complicated space, right?
Yeah.
And I think maybe it is for others to do, and there is great work happening, especially in the child rights space, right, on this question, right, of what do victims feel, what do victims want. So I don't have an answer to that, right? But have I read about it? Yes, right. Have I There is very interesting work coming in from the United States on victims. What do victims feel? And especially there's this work on a terror case, right? I can't recollect the name. It's not coming to me right now, right? Of saying that when victims ask repeatedly for the death sentence, what they're trying to do is, and it's one set of possibility for us to consider, and the book doesn't really make a claim that that's the only possibility, right? That it is also a way of dealing with loss, right?
Yeah.
And then when that person is executed, and this was in the context of this person called Timothy McVeigh, who was sentenced to death and executed for bombings in Atlanta, I think. Now, and I think the work was talking to families who had lost their loved ones in the bombing. Now, and it was interesting to see that once McVeigh is executed and is killed, and I think there's a very interesting area for work even here that families then started having to come to terms with that loss. It was almost like, now what?
Right.
Right? Now you've executed this person, right? This person is dead. After your loved one died, almost your entire energy is focused on getting this kind of justice,
Yeah.
right? And aimed at the person who's caused you that hurt and loss, right? And once that person is executed, what now, right? And then you're forced to come to terms with that loss then, right? So it's a complicated space. I don't want to pretend like I have all the answers, right? And I mean, especially on that segment on victims, I just want to say that are there victims who want that kind of punitive justice and the most punitive justice possible? Yes, right? But do all victims want just that? I don't think so, right?
Okay.
So this whole narrative that all victims want the same thing is something that we need to question and interrogate, right? While certainly some victims might want the harshest punishment possible, or even worse punishments than what the law provides for, I don't think all victims think alike, right? And I think justice would mean very different things for different people. Yeah.
Right. Do you feel wary that people might, say we're starting to lose focus when we empathize with rapists and murderers?
I think, if I may be brutally honest, I think people are scared to empathize, right? Why do I say that? Because empathizing with rapists, as you said, ultimately will force you to look at yourself, right? In the sense of, and I think and then the clamor for the death penalty and the harsher punishments is because I think we hate ourselves that we live in a society where these kind of things happen so common, right? That we are unable to do anything, right? We are unable to protect people, children, women, transgenders against this kind of rampant sexual violence.
True.
Right? None of us are immune from it. Everyone knows enough number of people who have been sexually harassed, assaulted, raped, right? It is in our midst, right?
Yeah.
It is not just something that happens that bad people do, right? And therefore it is convenient for us to look at certain people and say, yeah, it is something that these people do, these bad people do. And it's a way of trying to absolve yourself, right? And we can't absolve ourselves, right? Look at our own families, right? Our workplaces, our friendships, our relatives, and we all know what is happening, right? Yeah, you might say, oh, there is a difference in degree. Fine, but still, it is, I think these harsh reactions are about our difficulty in coming to terms with the reality of our society, about the extremely misogynistic society that we live in, right? And that's the reality.
Yeah.
And it would force us to come to terms with that.
And like how you said, society views these perpetrators, often we view them as really something is awfully wrong with them.
Demonized, yeah.
Yeah, we demonize them. But from your own experience of interacting with them, was it easy to detach and see the person behind it? Did you find that difficult to isolate them from their crime, which often we as society of tie them solely to the crime that they do?
It was not easy, right? I mean, it was not easy to say that. Obviously, before we interviewed each person, we knew what the offense was, right? And but very little else, as the legal documents mainly capture only that,
Yeah.
right? But I think when I reflect on that, I think meeting them as first people, sitting face to face with them, barely a couple of feet away, right? Hearing them speak, seeing them, right? At touching distance, right? That immediately tells you, I mean, whatever, it just places you in this context that you're talking to a human being, right?
Yeah.
And that changes. And I think it really would change a lot for a lot of people, just hearing and seeing people that you hate, right? That you think are such demons. They're not even, even judgment sometimes say, oh, these are people who are not even worthy of being called human beings, right? But just seeing that person, hearing that person tells you, and it is not about excusing that person or forgiving, or nobody's asking you to forgive anybody, but to tell you that these people are a complex product of many, many things, right? It is not just one thing, right? Just like you and I are not defined by one thing, right? You are not just this podcast host, right? And I am not just this person who does this kind of work. We are many things,
Yeah.
right? And so are they, right? And sitting across and hearing them and seeing them brings that point home almost immediately, right? That yes, you know a certain part of it, and you might have. I mean, also you have to train yourself to try and say, okay, I'm not just going to keep looking at and hearing this person from that perspective, right? But you have to um, deal with that complexity and mess that all of us are, not just those people.
Yeah. I'm sure there are many, but is there any particular, interaction that's really stood out for you?
Yeah, there are many actually. uh, mm, my first interview, my very first interview. Obviously, I can't say who or where it was because it will. Yeah, I can't. My very first interview was with this very young person. I think he must have been just about 19. I mean, he certainly hadn't reached 20. Again, child rape and murder,
Okay.
right? It was clear off the bat, right, that there was a certain kind of mental illness. I mean, obviously, I'm not trained to understand it fully or whatever. It just seemed that there were mental health concerns. And the story that he said of how he had this little bird with him in prison that had sort of flown into his cell, and how it would not leave him, right? And how he would take care of it every day, and that's what he does every day, right? That's what he's most concerned about, right? And taking care of that bird, and you wonder, right? And I will tell you what happened in that case later, right? And you say, okay, here is somebody that the state has condemned, the courts have condemned, and yet is capable of. I'm not saying this from the perspective of saying that, oh, he must be excused. But look at it. I mean, when I present these two facts to you, they are contradictory, they are jarring, right? Somebody who could have been convicted of an offense like this is capable of taking care and is so invested in taking care of a delicate thing like a bird in a prison, and right, those are very, you might say, oh, what is the relevance of that? Come on, why should we feel sympathy for that? And of course, about 3-4 years after that interview, he was acquitted by the High Court, right? And he was sent home, right?
Okay.
And completely acquitted. And that happens in nearly of every 100 death sentences given by the trial courts. It's about 30 to 35% that are ultimately acquitted. Not even that the punishment is reduced, that 30 to 35% are acquitted and sent home.
Okay.
Right. And yeah, and another story was this in a southern Indian state of this person having jumped prison twice, being on on death row, and all the other prisoners in that prison hated him because of him trying to jump or having jumped successfully. The conditions for death row prisoners were very, very harsh, right? In terms of, they were very restrictive because this guy had,
Right.
yeah. So when interviewing him, and, he has like this, almost like this cult status in that state, right? And is sort of like the way crimes are reported and how this personality is built. And he said, look, the reason I jumped was that once I got arrested and was sent to prison, there were these local brick kiln owners who were harassing his wife and daughter.
Okay.
Right. And nobody was coming to help the wife and daughter because they were this guy's family. Right. And these brick kiln owners were really going after the wife and daughter. Right. He said, what else could I do? Right. What else could I do? So I jumped and I called them. And he said, and I put the fear of life into, right? And I would keep a watch on my house because I obviously couldn't go there. Ultimately, he does get arrested both times, right? But he said I would keep watch. I was trying to protect my family. Now, what do you say to these things, right?
Yeah.
Without this context, you would say, yeah, here is a person who was inside prison for multiple murders, right, and dacoity, right, and he has then again jumped prison twice. You would say, oh, this is like really the worst of the worst, right? Not only are you arrested, then you're also then jumping prison. I would say, oh, he's certainly a criminal, kind of person. But the point I'm trying to make is that we almost seem to assume a certain kind of certainty about these stories without really knowing anything. We know only what we read in the papers or see on television, right?
Right.
Right. And these stories are like all our lives, as I know I've said it a few times, right? All these people, like all our lives, have complex stories, right? How they have become who they have become.
True. Yeah. Is that what the report also says about how quite a few of the convictions have been very prematurely given or wrongly meted out? Is that what the project tries to highlight, the research tries to highlight, that the death penalty in India can't be supported because there are so many major lapses in our system?
Yeah, it's certainly another point to consider, right? And it's a very strong point that even if we might disagree on the morality of the death penalty, whether it's moral, immoral, legitimate, illegitimate, even if we forget all of that, we have to ask ourselves a question whether we have a criminal justice system that is capable of handling the death penalty in a fair fashion.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there cannot be any debate, really. And it's not coming from somebody who opposes the death penalty, that even if you support the death penalty, you have to acknowledge the fact that our criminal justice system is completely broken, right? Torture is a reality, right? Evidence gathered on the basis of torture is also a reality, right? Wrongful prosecution, wrongful investigations, planting of evidence, manipulating evidence are all realities of our system, right? And nobody who is familiar with the criminal justice system will claim otherwise, right?
Okay.
Despite that, if you want to have the death penalty, is a different conversation, right? But you don't have a criminal justice system that is capable of administering justice in a fair manner. And that is true across punishments, right? Across crime. And in that context, do you really want to rely on taking somebody's life using the system that we have? Right? And the answer to me to that question is fairly obvious, right? We might argue till the cows come home on the legitimacy or the moral legitimacy of the death penalty, but I think there's very little to argue really on whether we have a criminal justice system, whether India has a criminal justice system that can handle such a punishment. And yeah, I certainly don't think it does.
If in the place of death penalty, then the next thing would be life imprisonment or life without parole.
Yeah.
But I mean, our prison systems are lacking so much itself. There needs to be major reforms in that avenue, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Marty, you're right in terms of that our prisons are not some great institutions of reformation, right?
Yeah.
They certainly aren't, right? They're very dark places, right? Um, you know, you are not going to really come out of their reform, right?
Yeah, especially the juvenile system. It only hardens them further.
Yeah. That's because we are really not investing either our thought or resources into saying, what does it mean to have a reformative prison system, right? And that's not a priority, right? Prison budgets are not a priority, right? And therefore, then the argument comes, oh, then on the one hand, it is not a social or political or economic priority to invest in prisons. Then you say, oh, then why are we keeping them in prisons? May as well kill them, right?
Yeah.
It is our failure that our prisons are not reformatory in nature, right? And because we have failed to create prisons that are reformatory in nature, we are then saying, yeah, we have failed, so may as well take that person's life, right? It is of great concern, and there are no easy answers to this, right? What do we do, right? Again, the law now from the Supreme Court is when you are commuting a death sentence, when you're reducing a death sentence, you can say that this person has to live for the rest of their life in prison without being let out for any reason, even if it is to go out on parole for a few days or go out on furlough for a few days. The court has said that courts can say that the state government cannot let them out for whatever reason, and that they can live, that they will be made to live the rest of their life in prison without ever getting. Now, that is incredibly harsh and cruel, right? Prisons all over the world, I mean, they recognize that, even if you are in prison for life imprisonment, state governments have the power under our criminal procedure code to see, okay, after a certain number of years, has this person reached a certain stage where we might want to release them, right?
Yeah.
And the courts have now saying in certain cases, the courts will decide that that power is being taken away. To tell somebody that you will never get up, not even for a few days, to go see your family and come back or whatever, that all you will do is live here for the rest of your life. Yeah, I mean, sounds and as somebody who opposes the death penalty and fights against the death penalty, it is no victory to get such a punishment, right? Even if in cases where we argue and they say, okay, we won't give you the death sentence, but we will give your the person you're representing such a punishment. It's no victory,
Yeah.
right? It's no victory. I think it's just as harsh. It's just as cruel. But it just stems, Marty, from us not thinking about our prisons, right? And it's not a priority, right? It's not, right?
That's true.
We are happy to not think about our prisons.
When you think about that, most people would again then, like you said, jump to, okay, death penalty is better. But sad thing is, even after they're given the sentence, it takes years before they're actually yeah.
I mean, who is it better for? It's better for you. It is better for your conscience, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's not good for anybody else. Yeah.
Right. I actually want to shift focus to death penalty when it comes to terror activities.
Right.
This is an adult who has methodically thought about it, trained for it. It's not a crime of passion.
Yeah.
So one would, and so many innocent lives have been lost, and
Yeah.
it's a war against the state. So one would argue, why shouldn't death penalty be given to such people?
I mean, I only have one answer to it, right? I mean, who are you? If you look at the cases, right? It is the foot soldier that often gets caught. You're not getting the great people who plan
The mastermind.
right. You're not right. You're not right. And an interesting example that I always give is what the British Parliament did in response to that Britain does away with the death penalty at the height of the conflict in Northern Ireland, right?
Right.
Right, which is as a violent situation as you can imagine, right? At the height of that, they do away with the death penalty, right? And the Parliament does it, saying that you don't want to create martyrs, right? You don't want to create martyrs, right? When people set out to carry out these activities with knowing that they very well are not going to live, right? Giving the death penalty is creating martyrs. And the same, Israel doesn't use the death penalty, right? Right. But again, I don't think Israel is a good example given all the other things that they do, right? They might not use the death penalty, right? But similarly, I think, in the report also we say, while there is a lot of conversation around the death penalty for terrorism, let's look at India's conflict zones, right?
Okay.
Be it Kashmir, Central India, or Northeastern India, the death penalty is not used there for offences against the state.
Okay.
The death penalty is not used in India's conflict zones because the state resorts to extrajudicial violence and killings there, right?
Right.
Right. So even the death penalty cases that you're seeing from these parts of the country where there is conflict, right, are not offenses against the state, right? While having the death penalty conversation, very often terrorism is invoked, but in actual practice on the ground, the death penalty is not used for it. So it almost seems like we want to conveniently use the terrorism argument. But in actually dealing with terrorism, we are adopting these really terrible measures like extrajudicial executions, right?
Okay. Often death penalty is given out on majorly like on two occasions where for political reasons, or there's a huge hue and cry about a public outcry, say in the case of Nirbhaya.
Yeah.
Do you often find that the judiciary gives into this?
And there is no way to say, how much of an influence it has had or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And it would be an interesting piece of research to do. But, we also know that what happens outside certainly has a sort of influence on what happens inside court. So while there are some cases that get that national attention, right? I think very often we forget the local pressure in many of these cases that you might not read in the national media or you might not hear in the national media, but there is so much local pressure operating, right? For that district judge, even though the newspapers in India's metro cities might not report on any of this, that local reality is just as much pressure, right? And so many judges have said about how trial judges have said, even if I give the death sentence, let the High Court deal with it, right? If they want to not give the death sentence, let them do it, right? Because these local pressures are tremendous, right? Yeah, you and I might not be familiar, or we might not have to live that because we don't hear about it. What I'm trying to say is not just the big ticket cases that we have read about, even in these cases that you don't hear about, which are the majority of cases where the death penalty is given, there's a tremendous amount of local pressure that operates, right? So yes, that what you call the collective conscience, right? Judges often invoke it in their own judgments,
Yeah,
right? Quite erroneously, right? It is not something that judges should take into consideration, right? Um, and in the 1980 judgment, which upheld the constitutional validity of the death penalty, the Supreme Court judges said that, in trying to decide which cases there should be death or no death, judges should not be oracles of public opinion, right?
True.
And that's such wise guidance, right? You are a judge who is supposed to decide a case according to the law. You are not there to decide a case according to public opinion. It is the rule of law. It is not the rule of people. Right? So you have to apply the law, not what you think, what the loudest voice amongst the people want. Right?
Yeah. And often media plays such a huge role in such cases.
Yeah.
What do you think begs to change in the way media's role in, especially on such delicate cases?
I wish our journalists would learn more of criminal law and criminal procedure, right? Uh, and and yeah, I genuinely think that would make a hell of a difference, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that is a whole different conversation on how media reports crime, right? And why does it report the way it reports? And it does so much damage, right? In terms of how they whip up emotions and all these, and I think what very often we don't see is the adverse consequences on the families of prisoners, right? What it does to them, the kind of ostracization and stigma that they have to face.
Yeah.
It destroys them, right? And for no fault of theirs, right? I mean, I assume nobody will make the argument that they also deserve to be punished, right? They deserve what they get,
Yeah.
and they are collateral damage, right? No, and I think the complete lack of responsibility with which the media reports some of these cases, uh, and the numerous cases where people in the community go and destroy the house of the offender, right, and destroy all their belongings, and it's makes you wonder what we are capable of as human beings, right?
I think this is going to be my final question. Given that, the rate of convictions for perpetrators has been, especially with sexual offenses, has been low,
Yeah.
and the fact that cases in our courts take for years and years together, do you think the next step of, say, if death penalty were to abolish, you think people would kind of lose faith in the judiciary and they would want to met out justice on their own?
I think what people would really want is that if somebody wants to go and register a complaint of sexual assault or rape, then the cops do it effectively, they investigate efficiently, they investigate on time, and that the court process happens efficiently and effectively, right?
Yeah.
I think people are more interested in reliable investigations and a certainty and effectiveness of the court process, right? And when you don't get those things, people tend to want harsher and harsher punishments. Because I think what you really need is more the certainty of punishment rather than the harshness of punishment, right? And in our system currently, yes, the faith that the people have in the various legal processes is very low, right? The police, and I'm not here to deny that there aren't problems on the victim side, right? If you want to go and register an FIR, it really depends on who you are, whether the cop takes you seriously or pushes you around or ill treats you. It's not very easy to, in that sense, register an FIR. Investigation does not happen properly, right? We don't have a modern police and investigation force, right? They are still using these ancient colonial methods of investigation. Our courts are overburdened, right? Nobody wants to engage with the court system as a witness or even as a victim. It is a very, very time-consuming, dragged-out process. So I think fixing the effectiveness and the efficiency of the legal system would increase the confidence in the legal system a lot more than just say harsher and harsher punishments, right? I mean, I don't know. I keep thinking. I mean, if people said, "Oh, we want public stoning," would we give them that? Right? Why not? I mean, and I think that's why there is like this intellectual failure of the people who lead us, right? It's very convenient for the political class to keep this conversation going about, oh, we need harsher punishments, right? And not do the difficult work of fixing the parts of our legal system around investigation, filing of FIRs, how courts conduct trials, right? So all of that is difficult work. It is unsexy work, right? It's so much sexier to just say, let's have harsher punishments, right? It's easier. It's a fast food solution, right?
That's true. Thank you so much, Dr. Anup. It was an honor to have you on the show and the kind of work that you do.
Thank you so much, Martha. Really appreciate you taking the time and interest in it. Thank you so much.
If you like this conversation and would like to reach out to me on any further questions or feedback, please do so on Maharani Talks on Instagram. Thank you.